Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man how to fish and you'll feed him for a lifetime. But what happens when you teach the man how to raise his own fish? Could you feed the entire community? Or better yet, could you feed the entire world? The process of raising fish for human consumption is known as aquaculture, which is a little bit of a play on the word agriculture. This information is applicable to anyone who's consumed seafood recently. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association says aquaculture supplies more than 50% of all seafood that is currently produced for human consumption in the United States, which means half the seafood you've ever eaten was probably raised in a farm. I began my research when I started looking at the rising prices of fish and how they were affecting my favorite food, which is sushi. And I noticed that all this fish couldn't necessarily be caught in the wild. When I started doing this research, I came across the concept of fish farming. First, we're going to talk about the growing need for aquaculture. Second, we'll talk about the process of how fish are farmed. And third, we'll discuss the pros and cons of fish farming. There is currently a rapidly increasing demand for fish, and there's an extremely shrinking supply for fish as well, based on our population and how overfished our oceans are getting. According to this graphic by Bloomberg Philanthropies, in 2011, the demand, also known as the human consumption of fish, was 130.8 million tons. The supply, which is how much fish was captured in the wild, was 78.9 million tons. This gap was covered by aquaculture. As you can also see, in 2030, the estimated demand is to be 154 million tons. The supply is on a downward trend, which means there is a significantly larger gap that will need to be covered. And this gap will most likely end up being covered with aquaculture. Now that we've seen why there is a need for aquaculture, it's time to talk about how fish are farmed for the purpose of human consumption. The minute details vary from depending on what kind of fish you're growing, so we're going to take a look at the big picture. Fish farming is started all in fish hatcheries. According to recreation.gov, fish hatcheries were established in the 1800s to enhance the number of fish in streams and lakes where native fish populations were declining due to changes in the natural environment. This concept carried over from just hatcheries on to hatcheries specifically made for farms. In a hatchery, fish eggs are hatched, and fish are grown and fed until they reach juvenile age. Once they reach a juvenile age, the fish are then sold to farms, where the fish are raised in a farm until their peak age and peak size. Farms can either be tanks of water on land, or they can be in-ground bodies of water such as ponds, streams, or lakes, anywhere where the conditions are right for the specific type of fish to be grown. Once they hit peak size, they're ready to be sold, whether it to be a wholesaler or a distributor, or straight to a grocery store, or right to a restaurant. Farmers are now starting their own hatcheries along with their land-based farms because fish farming provides an extra income stream, and it's a profitable one as well. Mike Royals, a fish farm manager of Langdale Farms in Valdosta, Georgia, has talked about how the need for aquaculture is not only going up throughout the world, but also specifically here in Georgia. Now that we've covered the basics of the fish farming process, I'm going to talk about the benefits and the drawbacks of aquaculture. According to PBS, the benefits include job growth and international food production to solve crises such as the world food crisis. It takes a lot of people to run a fish farm, which is why agriculture is a founding stone of this country, and fish farming can be just that with how many jobs it will create. Some of the drawbacks of fish farming include genetic mutations and waste. Genetic mutations might occur if fish inbreed too much while in a hatchery or at the beginning stages while they're moved to a farm, but this is all cured by a good fish farm manager. If a manager can be on top of these things, these genetic mutations can be perfectly avoided. Waste is probably the biggest problem with a fish farm. There's no specific way to use fish waste, so it all ends up in our oceans, which isn't the best for pollution. Compared to something as cow manure, there's no purpose for fish waste right now. Scientists are currently working on repurposing waste and adding nutrition to it so that it could possibly be used as fertilizer or manure. If this process can be done, there there's virtually no drawbacks to the concept of fish farming. Now that you know about the need for aquaculture, the way fish are farmed, and the benefits and drawbacks, you'll be able to understand the aquaculture industry a little bit better. You'll also you'll be able to understand why you see fish labeled as farm ready or naturally grown or caught in the wild. You'll be able to defer and tell why labels are the way they are. Hopefully, fish farming can benefit the planet that we live in and everyone living in it with its benefits.